Hey, Zaka family. Zaka is launching an exclusive membership platform to provide you with career development workshops, coaching, community, and so much more. Go to ZakaConnect.com and sign up to receive information on how to access early registration and perks. Hello, everybody. This is Paul Herman, the Prince of Motivation and host of Zaka Presents My Journey. We're creating this vulnerable and positive platform where you can get inspired and motivated from different leaders from our community. Today, our guest is Neelu Kaur, who is an exec leadership coach, speaker, and author. Neelu, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours. The pleasure is all ours. Looking forward to hearing a lot about your journey, and I know that there's going to be some stories you got to share with us this evening.
Yes.
Looking at that bio and looking at some things, I know our listeners are going to look. They're like, "What are you talking about, Paul?" Trust. Listen to the journey. Listen to the story, guys. Going to drop some gems. But before we get into that, could you just let us know a little bit more about your cultural background and where you grew up?
Sure. So I was born in India and raised in the US. So my parents came here with me and my brother. They had after they bought their tickets and finally made it over here, we had about 75 US dollars. And so from there,
As a whole.
Yeah, as a whole.
Oh, whoa. Let's come on now.
Yeah, exactly. So total immigrant struggle. And my parents are not college educated. And so their mission was to make sure their kids had a better life. And so that was really the impetus of coming. And so one of the things I struggled with early on, as you know, I was born in India and raised here, is that coming from an immigrant background, it's just not, some of the rules of living are very different when you come from a collective we-based culture and you are growing up in an I-based, very individualistic society. And we can talk more about that later.
That is definitely a big change right there. Definitely a big change.
Yeah.
And you're questioning at that some point in time in your career and your life, and we're going to talk more about that. Where you're probably like, which one do I adapt to? Right? This is the way of doing it before, but now this is the newer way. Or do I find a happy medium? How did your childhood your experiences, whether from India or even in the States at a young age, how did it shape you today?
Yeah, well, I have a story to emulate this. So anytime I would say, these are my toys, my parents would actually get upset and say, nothing is yours, everything is ours. So at home, everything was shared. There was no I or me or my desires or my wants or my needs. It was about group harmony, which is very common in Asian cultures, and not just Asian, South Asian cultures, but Latin cultures, African cultures, Middle Eastern cultures. They're very collective, very based in sort of group harmony. The mindset is that you keep your head down, you do great work, and your work will speak for itself. And that is a recipe for disaster in corporate America.
You and a lot of our guests have said the same thing. It's like one of those things. I'm like, okay. I know our listeners are picking up on it because it's a significant amount of people we've interviewed, and a lot of those things do come up. But what does like your culture mean to you? And like, what is like some of the advantages that it helps you bring to like your business?
I find myself being like a kid in a candy store. I pick out the good things that I want to keep and take out the bad. And that's the case for American culture and Indian culture. So the good things I incorporate into my daily life. And then there's things that I don't necessarily agree with and have sort of taken out of my life. So I think if we can all go in with that mindset that we come from different places and there's good about those places and very good about that culture. And there's also things that may not resonate. So you can be a kid in a candy store. You can choose what you want to take forward and leave what you don't want. And you can do that and cross and dance between different cultures and things, because ultimately you are the one that decides what you're going to do every day.
And that's a very hard thing to do, especially when you have your parents really like in the forefront. They're the ones that provided you with the opportunity. You wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them, right?
Absolutely.
So it's hard to kind of like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it my way.
I think earlier on it is because you're so influenced by the home you grew up in or the apartment you grew up in. Your parents are right there. But then it's like you leave, you go to college, you work, and you start to feel like, okay, I have a voice for myself, at least in the US or in North America. This is common, right? Like you leave home for school, maybe. I don't know. Actually, maybe I'm generalizing. Maybe a lot of immigrants don't leave home, but I did. I left my parents' house to for college and then grad school and all of that. And so I think that at some point you determine, it may be for you, it might be in your early 20s, it may be in your 30s, it may even be in your 40s, but at some point you
Yeah.
wake up and you're like, I have to create my own individual voice and figure out where I am, where I belong in this world. And that requires us to pick and choose what works and what doesn't work.
And previous guests have expressed to us like that it's hard sometimes when doing something like that, because if you don't do it at the right time, you kind of miss a good window, right? Because you're like, I only know it this way, right? But then if you adapt other new things, but over time, finding the right people, finding the right mentorships, you got to go through a lot of experiences. You got to find the right job. And that's what I want to, kind of dive into a little bit more with you is like, before you became a speaker and an author and exec leadership coach advocate for yourself, advocating for yourself, like in the workplace, like what was like your dream profession in your career? Like what was it going to look like for you when you were coming up?
Yeah. So when I was a little girl, I thought I wanted to be, and I still sometimes think I want to be a therapist. So I thought I was going to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And what actually happened is when it was time to go to school, my dad was like very immigrant mentality. He said, well, I'm not paying for you to go to NYU undergrad and come out with a psychology degree. He's like, you need to make money after 4 years. And so I really didn't know what to do. So I focused on business. I did minor in psychology. And then ultimately I returned back to psychology, which is my true passion is really around people. I feel like I'm a social scientist. My master's is in social and organizational psychology. So I'm not a psychologist for individuals. I'm more like a business therapist. Like I work with companies and teams to help them be more productive, to be happier. So in some ways I'm kind of doing that work, but it's not the same work. Coaching and therapy are totally different. But I think there was always a part of me that wanted to help and do something great. And I think I'm doing it in just a different way.
That's nice. That's nice. And corporations and businesses, whether small or large, need individuals like yourself.
Yes, I agree.
And I feel like coming from different backgrounds and different experiences kind of help, because sometimes when you're in corporate America, you're only thinking at one box. You're like, this is it. This is how we've been doing it for the past 20 years. But to have other individuals pop in and kind of like implement new ideas and thoughts or even spark some new interest really does help. I've seen that happen when I was in corporate America myself as well too. What was your first corporate job?
So after undergrad, my first job was at Ernst & Young, and I was just like a plain old consultant. I don't know what they called them. I was just a plain old consultant, and I think I can't remember if I got downsized or if I got fired. And I think I mentioned to you this before when we were prepping for the show, was that
listeners, listen up.
I have been fired so many times. I have been let go so many times. I probably have a history of like the biggest number of layoffs or downsizings, firings, whatever you call them. And I truly believe that the root cause of all of that was not because I'm not intelligent, that I don't do good work. It's really because I did not know how to advocate for myself. Because I was taught, my parents are immigrants. They had, when we first came to the US, they had 5 and 6 jobs each. They had no ego about the types of jobs that they were going to do. They were just trying to put food on the table. And so for me, I learned a model that I witnessed from my family was just keep your head down and just do good work. And so I would go into these companies like Ernst & Young. I also worked at Deloitte for a short period of time. It's like you are one of thousands of people. So, a company like Deloitte, I think they have over 500,000 employees worldwide, I think. But even in the US, like it's over 50,000 employees. So you can easily just become another number.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you're in environments like that, that's when you really need to create like your own personal brand. You need to cultivate those relationships, find those advocates, the sponsors, the allies, the mentors, because if you don't find that, you're just going to get lost in the numbers.
And years pass by real quick.
Oh yeah.
They go by, you like, oh, I got the job.
Yes.
Next was 5 years later, you're like, well, I still got the same job. And all your friends are like climbing up the ladder, and you're like, wait, hold up. Y'all not in the same office with me no more?
Exactly.
I'm in the same cubicle. But You're right. Keeping your head down and just showing up and just being present at work is not the same as advocating for yourself at the job force, right? So like that, I mean, and that had to hurt, so I'm assuming that was one of the struggles right off the top, like just being in corporate America. The struggle of advocating for yourself was probably one of the biggest struggles that you had at that time.
Yes, and I didn't know that that was the issue. So I kept getting fired, I kept getting downsized, and I was like, it's just me. And my self-esteem had plummeted. I thought I was just not smart. I thought there was just something wrong with me. And, even my friends and my family would be like, what's wrong with her? Like, she keeps getting fired. Like, she obviously can't hold down a job, right? It's like,
Don't bring that to mom and dad. Don't do that, kid.
yeah,
Don't. Your friends are bad friends, right?
yeah, so you're just like, okay, something's wrong with me. I'm not meant to do this. I don't know. I can't find my way. So there was a lot of imposter syndrome, negative self-talk, like lots of things that had, like, it really impacted my mental health and well-being because I just kept getting fired. I kept getting downsized.
And I could only imagine in your culture or just in general, just a lot of the immigrant background, like we didn't know anything about, the therapists and mental health.
Exactly.
Right? If you had mental health, it was get some Advil.
My-
You got a headache, you get some Advil.
I'm laughing because with Indians, like it's a joke that if you say you're not really supposed to talk about it. And if you bring it to the surface, it's like, oh, go have some milk and go to sleep.
That's it.
It's just like that's going to solve all of your problems.
Is it? Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm Caribbean background myself, so Jamaican and St. Lucian. It was like always have some tea, right?
Exactly.
I'm like, Mom, I got anxiety, right? Drink some tea and you'll be fine. And you're like, tea, but mind you, I'm sipping the tea, like, okay, it went away, right?
Yeah.
But it's just so much that as a child growing up, and now that I'm an adult, I'm like, wait, what was I thinking? What was our family thinking? But again, that's all they could provide at that time.
Exactly.
Tea and Advil, if that was it. But nowadays, since we're more grown and mature adults, we found other ways to do it.
I agree.
Now,
I agree. And I think like that's important to keep in mind too. And something I struggled with was each moment, every person is doing the best that they can. So even though our parents didn't know any better, they were doing the best that they could
yes,
in that moment. So that helps me like forgive some of the things that have happened, or even with employers, right? Like managers that didn't know how to manage. Like I'm just like in that moment, he or she did the best that they could. It just didn't result in, the outcome that I wanted, but it really helps me sort of move forward and just say, okay, we're all just doing the best we can do in this moment.
that is a really great way of like really like moving past the situation.
Yeah,
That's you did the best you could at that time.
exactly.
And you got to go through certain experiences in life to probably even become better or even have this type of conversation to then think even better for the next time. So
Right.
I'm glad you brought that in. And now I know that the Indian culture has obviously influenced you in so many different ways. But like, how did like your upbringing and your tradition in the Indian culture, how did it influence you in your earlier career? And obviously there was obviously some goods to it, but there was also some bads, as you mentioned about like just not advocating for yourself. But what are some like the positives that came from it?
I mean, I think the work ethic comes from coming from an immigrant family is that you see your parents working so hard. So work is not something that you're scared of. And there's no such thing as like being lazy. So I think in some ways that was really helpful, but anything in excess is bad for you, right? Like I find myself, I can work myself to a pulp and be exhausted and say I work too much, right? So what's really good can also be bad for you, right? Like anything in
Mm,
excess. So it's something to think
yep.
about. It's like, yes, we have some of these things, and anything that we do too much or if we overdo on it, it can become sort of a deterrent.
Yeah. Too much of something could be bad.
Yes.
But I remember doctors when I was a kid, they used to say, "Oh, you drink enough water, it's gonna be bad for you." I'm like, "What? Would you
Yeah.
tell me to drink water? That don't make no sense." But they're like, "Nah, the simplest thing, right?"
Yes.
Now, you've worked in corporate for over a decade, and obviously you've gotten laid off
More.
more than that. Oh,
Yeah.
more than that, yeah. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? But like over so many decades, you've been working in corporate America. Like, how do you describe your experience, like transitioning to your company? Like or transitioning from companies to company and then getting like obviously some of them you got laid off and some of you probably just made the transition on your own. Like how'd you kind of like walk through that?
So my last major downsizing was in 2013, and I worked at a very large investment bank. And I was not in finance. I was actually training and coaching all of the technologists. So I got that job out of grad school after I got my master's in social and organizational psychology, and I was brought into the business. I was in a technology business. I was basically coaching and training all of the technologists. And so I learned very quickly that people who are very, very smart, very intelligent subject matter experts, they are immediately discounted. They think, oh, they're just really good software engineers or program designer, or sorry, UX designers or whatever. And they can do that. They can't actually lead people. And I was finding that with some training, with some coaching on emotional intelligence, some communication skills, they actually became transformational leaders. So something happened for me in that moment where I was like, this is not just the case for technologists, but anyone that's very technical in their role actually has the potential to be an amazing leader. And so that was a big learning lesson for me. So when I got downsized in 2013, I decided I was going to go out on my own and figure it out. And then it slowly, like, it's never linear, right? Like, I worked with different organizations. I'm on the, I partner with different companies as an executive coach. Some of them are directly my clients, some are through other companies, but you just figure out your way, and it's never really a linear path.
And how many, and just with the layoffs, I'm assuming mentally that was throwing you off a little bit.
Oh, yes. Yes. And even now, like, so 2013 was my last one. I've been out on my own since then. So it's well over a decade. And through this decade, it has been a roller coaster. Like, it's never, when you have a job, like a job at a company, you assume, like, for the most part, you're stable. Like, you think unless they let you go, like, you have that paycheck coming in every two weeks. When you're an entrepreneur, that's not the case, right? So you have to have this grit about you to actually go out there and do what you need to do to sell your services and to sell yourself. So it's not an easy path. I don't know if the listeners are they internal employees? Are they sort of entrepreneurs, or both? I say no.
Oh, it's a mixture.
Yeah, no path is
Mixture.
easy.
Yeah.
It's just deciding what you want to do with the time that you have here on Earth.
And on Earth, you better drop some gems on Earth. Yes. Not even just today, on Earth. As a whole. We going
Right, because that's the other thing. When you're young, when you're younger, you think you have endless amounts of time to do something. And so you're just like, oh, I'm just going to, sit on the couch and be on TikTok. And then before you know it, like 5 hours have passed. And those are 5 hours you're never going to get back again. Right. And so when I say on Earth, it's like, as time keeps going, you're going to realize, like, time here is finite. And so what am I going to do with this finite time?
That's the most expensive currency right there.
Exactly.
That is, you can't get it back, right? And when you spend it, you spend it. So how you going to spend it is the real question. Exactly. And I see that you spent it on yourself a lot by obviously transitioning from corporate and being an entrepreneur. Like, what has been like the biggest like change for you from being in corporate to now being an entrepreneur?
I think the biggest thing that I do is I invest in myself through continuing ed. So I actually consider myself a continuing ed junkie. I'm always learning and always taking new classes, getting new certifications. And it's really a way to enhance what I do and help others. But for me, I'm a constant learner. I love to read and I love to learn. And so one of the things, despite what type of job you have or what type of profession you're in, I think you have to embed some sort of continuing ed. Otherwise, you will just be outdated. Like, you're not going to be able to keep up because we're just in this exponentially changing time. And so there's constant information. Yeah. So it's like you're going to become obsolete if you're not somewhat up to date on what's going on in your lane, in your world.
And also obsolete if you're not advocating.
Yes.
Right. Absolutely. I'm going to bring it back to that because I know you talked about that, but like, things is advancing so quickly. I mean, there was a time when it was just the only way to read something was by going to the library.
Right.
Everyone had library cards. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Swipe in and you go inside, you get yourself a library book, you check a book out. Nowadays, you can do it right from your phone. It's now you have people that read you the books. So life is advancing, but at the same time, while it's happening, we have to take more initiative to advocate for ourselves, because as that's happening, we have to say, okay, well, look, this is today, but tomorrow I need to be 2 steps ahead of the game because I can see what's happening around me. When did you realize that there was a demand for enriching organizations and helping them with empowering them to be self-advocates?
When did I?
Like, when did you realize there was a demand? Like, obviously, as you transition from corporate into your entrepreneur lifestyle and life that you're living now, when did you realize that there was a big demand to help other organizations understand the value of self-advocating?
So when I got downsized in 2013, I then started my own practice where I was working with organizations, teams, and individuals. So I'm also a coach, right? An executive coach, a leadership coach. And I realized like when I started working with more teams and more individuals, I noticed that there was this common thread amongst women of color, amongst, say, introverted folks, neurodivergent folks, many folks that are dyslexic, like different learning challenges, right? They
Mm,
were the ones that struggled the most with speaking up. Like they would do the work, but they wouldn't actually know how to interject and get back into a conversation if they were silenced, or someone
mm,
would take their ideas in the room and they didn't know how to gracefully come back in. And so I realized it was not something I struggled with. It's something that a lot of us struggle with who are uncomfortable with conflict, who come from cultures where it's rude to actually talk up or speak out in any way against someone who's like of a higher authority level,
yeah, that's right. That's right.
right? Like there's more hierarchy in certain cultures, especially in Asian cultures. And so if your manager is in the room or the manager's manager is in the room, you might feel reluctant to speak up, right? And so these are things that are embedded in our DNA because of where we come from. And so when you get into corporate America, it's like you have to unlearn some of that in order to become your own self-advocate.
Mm, mm. And it's a scary moment to do that because sometimes you're the only one doing it. And more importantly, you're the only person doing it that looks like you.
Correct.
That
Correct.
that comes from the same background. So it's hard to sometimes say, well, is this the right move? Should I be moving in this direction? But that's why it's important to get, leaders and mentors, people who have been in that environment in corporate or in your profession to give you a little bit of guidance with that. And I'm assuming that kind of like guided you into writing this book that you
Yes.
have.
Yes.
Talk to us
But
about that.
yeah, so my book is Be Your Own Cheerleader, and it's directed for Asian and South Asian women, but the skills and tools in the book are applicable to anyone that struggles with self-advocacy. So again, if you're an extremely introverted person or you're very technical, you're a technologist and you're an engineer and it's something that you're an engineer and that's what you do and you don't know how to speak up, right? Like, so the book is not just for women, but it's targeted towards Asian and South Asian women because there's a huge cultural component to it.
Mm,
But
mm,
what I found so fascinating is when I'm in organizations teaching workshops or speaking about my book, I find that the people that find a lot of value from it are actually pretty surprising to me. Tall white men that had no clue of some of the challenges. And so they've become more inclusive leaders and more like an ally once they realize, like, oh, I didn't realize that this person on my team might be struggling with this. So it's like we don't want to just talk to our audience. We want to talk to everyone so that they understand why we are the way we are.
mm, mm, mm. It's crazy how the book how it works out. You're targeting this type of demographic, but the person that could truly benefit from it is now reading that book.
Right.
And how are people getting the book? That's the question. How do people have access to purchasing the book? Where can they find it?
Everywhere, like Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. You can go to a local bookstore and ask them to carry it if you want to support local. I'm on Audible. You can listen if you're more auditory. It's everywhere. So my publisher is amazing and we're all over the place. So anytime you type in Be Your Own Cheerleader, you will find a way to get it.
Mm-hmm. Can I use my library card?
Yeah, I think so. It depends, right? I don't know what neighborhood you're in. It depends on the neighborhood. I would say if it's a very homogenous neighborhood, maybe they won't have a book on self-advocacy for people of color.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I got you. Well,
Yeah.
congratulations on the book. Much success with it. I'm assuming there's going to be so many more books to follow. Is this correct?
I hope so. It's a long journey.
Oh, well, true. It's a lot to document as well, too. To put all of that into it's your life. It's other people's lives. You're trying to like kind of squeeze it all into a couple of chapters, but it's not meant for a couple of chapters, right?
Right.
So that's why I was saying maybe there is a part 2 coming up.
There's a part 2. I'm working on sort of figuring that out. But yes, there's always a part 2, part 3. Again, we have to make sure that we're not just working, right? Like we also want to live and enjoy life. And so I'm trying to figure out the balance for me.
That's whew. Especially as an entrepreneur.
Yes, exactly.
Like you said, in corporate, it was a little bit easier because it was structured. It was like, this is what you got to do. Show up to work a 9 to 5 or whatever the time was and get out of there. Nowadays, as an entrepreneur, not only do you have to kind of find those new opportunities, but you also got to be a very big cheerleader for yourself. And you got to self-advocate and wear so many other hats. So I can only imagine what that lifestyle looks like for you.
Yes, exactly.
Now, how can an organization actively support and encourage immigrants to become self-advocates, and find value in that?
I think organizations that realize that there's a gap there, they can start investing in programs, like organizational psychologists like myself that focus on this demographic, or finding speakers, finding authors. The thing is, there's so few of us out there. There are so few authors that are Asian, or so few authors of color compared to collectively what's going on. So the way that individuals and organizations can support us is by constantly hiring us, right? And so having the word out, sharing, like a lot of companies where the C-suite are usually white men, may not even realize that this is an issue, right? So we need to be vocal about it. We need to post about it. We need to be more inclusive of the immigrant journey, because I don't know what the percentages of immigrants in the US, but I imagine it's a huge percentage.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, everyone, if you think about it, like everyone's coming in for the American dream. So people are flying in, traveling in, driving in, wherever they're coming from, they're coming. So, and I know that's always been a hard thing, especially in the US, where people are like, oh, there's immigrants coming to take our jobs. And some immigrants are just some of the most hardest working individuals, right? And it kind of affects that kind of, that that mindset here in the States and stuff like that. But it's something our parents and our grandparents, that's what they were brought up on. And you can't really knock that for what it is, because that's what they know.
Right. And so when someone, if you're one of those leaders, and you cannot expect people to just park that part of themselves outside. Like they walk into a building and then they're like this robot, like this corporate America robot, that you cannot expect that to happen, because we all come from such diverse backgrounds, and there's so many good qualities that come from those diverse backgrounds. And so in order for us to be innovative, to be creative as organizations, like we want to make sure those voices are heard and those ideas are heard.
Now, if you, in regards to being heard, how are you listening, or even staying true to your cultural identity, and at the same time adapting to the new? I know we talked about it briefly about that when you came from India to America, and like you had the two different things right there, two different cultures. How are you adapting to that?
So I think one tool that's really helped me is thinking of, like, I don't drive, I don't have a car, but if you do drive, this is an easy analogy.
You in New York, you good.
Yes, I don't own a car, and I'm proud that I don't own a
I
car.
just
But
I wanted the listeners to know. I didn't want them to think that you just don't drive.
yeah, no, I don't drive.
You don't need to drive.
No. So if you think of a speedometer in a car, right? Like there's a dial. So on one side is the we dial, and on the other side is the I dial. So you can still authentically be you. I can still be Neelu. I can be Indian Neelu. But what happens is, when I'm in a performance review conversation, or I'm on a sales call, or I'm in a business development call, whatever it is, I have to turn up the I, even though it's uncomfortable. It's viscerally uncomfortable to talk about my accomplishments, to talk about the clients I have, but I'm on in that context. And then if I'm in a brainstorm, if I'm brought into a team to work with the team and to create like a team charter or whatever I'm working on, that's more we, right? So I still am me. I am just adjusting based on who's across from me. And I
True.
think when I
The
think
room,
about it,
reading the room.
exactly. So always know your audience and know that you can still be true to yourself. You're just turning up or turning down certain aspects of yourself.
Hmm. And it's still you.
It's still you.
It's still you. It's just a we or an I.
Exactly.
And
I think earlier on in my career, I felt like I was trying to fit into what that looked like to be an employee in corporate America, and I was trying to fit myself into a box that didn't fit. And I think now that I've sort of identified this, it's very fluid. You can be based on the context, you have to adjust in a we setting, and based on the context, you adjust to the I. And I think when I think of that speedometer of the dial, I feel more authentic to me. I just have to turn up or turn down.
yeah, makes it a lot more organic.
Yeah.
Right? That transition doesn't feel like 0 to 60 real quick. It feels like you're gradually, moving back to forth. But that also comes with confidence.
Exactly.
You got to
And
be very confident in yourself.
yeah, I mean, the more you do it, it's like a muscle, right? So if you are in sales, the more sales calls you have, the more comfortable you're going to be. If you're in a performance review conversation and you're an analyst and you're right out of college, it's going to feel uncomfortable because you haven't been in that situation many times. The more you do it, the more you have them, the more comfortable
Yeah,
you're going to be.
true. That goes back to the experience. Yeah, experience makes it makes a big difference. It
Yes.
makes a massive difference. And I know that all the things that you've been talking about, I know I'm really, really loving that the fact that you're really highlighting like the self advocate thing. That lane has been a very big lane, a big conversation, and a lot of the people that we've talked to as our guests. Now I know that you're going to be leading a few workshops with Zaka.
Yes.
I'm very excited for that, and I know our listeners are excited as well too. Could you talk to us a little bit more about what you're going to be doing in your workshop?
So the workshops are in June and it's around communication skills. So a lot of people who are coming out of college and they're moving into their first job, they may not know some basic skills around meeting facilitation, about getting your voice heard. Like, what do you do when someone interrupts you and tries to take credit for your thoughts or your ideas, right? Like, how do we gracefully jump back into the conversation? So we're going to tackle communication skills that are very practical. So it's a workshop where you're going to learn skills that you can literally practice the next day.
And that's going to be the target market right there, the target audience.
Yes.
Okay, good. And when it comes down to like one of my last questions I want to ask you is that you've accomplished a lot and you've been through a lot. Obviously, those layoffs has been a little bit of a struggle, right? But if you look back at your earlier career and the struggles, like what is the message that you have obtained over the many years? I know it seems like you're persistent. Your self advocacy is one, but what is like that when you put it into like a nutshell, what is that?
So get out of your own way and keep it moving. So in the moment when you get fired or you get downsized or something happens, you think it's going to impact your whole life, and it's just a blip on the map of your life. You just don't realize it at the time. So
it's a couple hours.
Exactly. A couple of hours, maybe you're upset for a day, and then before you know it, you have to move on, right? So the idea is that this is time that's finite. How much time are you going to spend in an unresourceful way? So keep it moving, get out of your way is really, and don't sweat the small stuff.
And we sometimes are our own roadblock. We might point the finger at somebody else, but it's really us because it's not us advocating for ourselves. We might say, well, it's our boss not providing us that opportunity, but you never spoke up and said that that's what you wanted, right?
Exactly. So I'd say my motto is get out of the way, keep it moving.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to do that in 2024 and in many more years to come. And I'm looking forward to seeing and hearing more about this in your workshop series. I think at least two of them or so, right?
Yes.
That you're going to be doing with Zaka. Neelu, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for just being present with us, sharing your story. Something I admire about you. There's a lot of times when I've spoken to individuals that talk about being laid off, it's like you could see them just go back to like a very depressive stage. They're like, oh, I got laid off. It didn't work out. But you're like smiling away, right? You're like, if the audience members are able to see this right now, you are smiling. Every time you said the word layoff, you were just smiling. And I'm like, that's a different mentality. And I think I've heard the word layoffs, and obviously I've been laid off myself too. So I think bad, but you have turned layoffs into a good word because every time you got laid off, it led to another great thing for you. And look where you are today. So congratulations. Kudos to you. Your parents will be very proud of you and all the work that you've been doing. And all the work you're doing in those organizations is truly going to pay off in the long run.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And to the listeners, I just want to let them know, if you want to hear more inspirational stories like Neelu, please check us out on ZakaConnect.com. Follow our social at Zaka Connect and follow our feed Zaka wherever you listen to your podcasts.